for joining me for the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. So if you've ever been coached by me or taken my coach training, you know that one of my favorite modalities is called ACT, which stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or training in our case, or maybe ACC, Acceptance and Commitment Coaching. And on this podcast, I have had a conversation with Stephen Hayes, who is one of the originators, co-founders of the whole discipline. And today I'm delighted to bring you a conversation with Russ Harris, who is probably the world's leading popularizer of ACT, who has taught more people how to do it through ACT Made Simple, and also one of the most popular books for lay people to use the techniques to improve their own lives, called The Happiness Trap. So if you or anyone you know ever struggles with things like a runaway mind that keeps saying unhelpful things, maybe put downs, maybe snap judgments, or behaviors that seem impulsive and get in the way of you achieving the life you want, I think this will be a very useful and enlightening conversation. So without further ado, Russ Harris, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, as we said, this conversation has been 4 years in the planning. And I first came across your work before I was ready for it, and now I've been ready for a couple of years now. You are the author of The Happiness Trap and ACT Made Simple, and you have really, I think more than anybody else, popularized a form of, I don't even want to call it therapy, but I guess it is a form of therapy called ACT that to me is like the simplest, most sane way of helping most people with most of their issues. I would love to hear a little bit about your backstory and how you stumbled across this work and then made it your own and shared it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, 4 years. It's been a long time coming. So ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or outside of a therapy context, Acceptance and Commitment Training. So it's often used in workplaces and, in sports psychology and so forth. And they just changed the T. It's the same principles and practices. Whether you're in a therapy setting helping someone with depression or addiction, or whether you're a sports coach helping someone, run out and onto the pitch and face a team with, wondering if their contract is going to be renewed in front of 40,000 spectators, or, helping someone in the business world perform under high pressure. It's the same principles. It's just that the setting varies a little bit. And so I came across ACT, back in 2003. I've been looking for something like it, and experimenting with putting bits and pieces of various other models of therapy together to try to create a package I was happy with. And then when I discovered ACT, it had everything that I wanted already there, all assembled, and it was just love at first sight. It was like, wow, this is really, I think you just summarized it very well. It's just such a practical, realistic way of dealing with life's troubles and difficulties and making the most of life. So it was it was a hallelujah moment when I discovered it in a bookstore. It was like the clouds parted and there were angels flying around and I could hear the hallelujah chorus. It was like, wow, this is amazing, amazing, amazing. And so that was almost 20 years ago. And shortly after reading the book, I'm based in Australia, and shortly after reading, there was only one book on ACT at the time. It was a textbook written by Stephen Hayes, the guy who created the model. And so I flew to the USA and did some training with him. And then I thought, I need to spread this to the world. And I kind of started writing books about it, 10 books so far, but the best known is The Happiness Trap. So that, I guess The Happiness Trap, well, maybe I should just talk a little bit about what ACT is. Would that be a...
Yeah. I was thinking, just first of all, like what it is for people who've never heard of it. And then I'm curious, like what it enabled you to do that you hadn't been able to do before, but maybe let's just start simply with like what is ACT? Because you explain it so beautifully and succinctly in your work.
Well, so that gets its rather unusual name, and you do pronounce it as you do shorten it to ACT, not ACT, because at its core it's about taking action. It's about taking action to build a better life, do the things that are important and meaningful, and then engaging fully in what you're doing. And so it gets its name from a key message: accept what's out of your control and commit to action that improves your life. Which is a lot easier said than done. It's a skills-based approach. It involves learning kind of three sets of skills, really. So one set of skills is about how to handle difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, how to take the impact out of them, how to let them flow through you without sweeping you away or holding you back or pushing you down. I call these kind of unhooking skills, really how to unhook from difficult thoughts and feelings so they can't jerk you around so much. The second skill set is about living your values. Your values are your heart's deepest desires for how you want to treat yourself or others or the world around you, what you want to stand for in life, the sort of person you really want to be deep in your heart, and translating those values into goals and into actions and into strategies to make your life better. And then the third stream of symptoms involve the third stream of skills involve focusing your attention. So kind of focusing your attention on what's important right here, right now, engaging fully in what you're doing, giving your full attention to the activity at hand. And it's those combinations of skills really enable us to kind of get on with our life, do the stuff that's important, deal with the inevitable pain that goes with living a full human life, and to really kind of focus on and engage in life so we get the most out of it.
Beautiful. So it differs from other therapeutic forms that I was familiar with, and that like one thing, is that you don't have to understand where everything comes from. Right? Like it's not like Freudian on the couch, oh, this symbolizes this, or my mother didn't give me that. Like we don't have to figure any of that out. So I'm kind of wondering like what you were doing before you discovered ACT and how it changed how you helped people. Maybe you have a story.
Yeah, well, so I was a family doctor, a GP. And I became very interested in the psychological aspects of health. As time grew on, so I became very interested in the psychological aspects of health and well-being. As a GP, the vast majority of stuff that you deal with has a significant psychological component. I mean, even when you just get run down with the flu, it's most likely to happen when you're very, very stressed. I think in most, if not all, Western countries, there's an over-medicalization of health issues. There's so much focus on writing the prescription and making the diagnosis that very often the psychological side of medical problems is diminished or forgotten about or trivialized. And so I became very, very interested in those psychological aspects of health and well-being. At the same time, I was in my own life pretty depressed. Here I was, a young doctor. I'd kind of ticked all the boxes, followed the rules, kind of got this job with status and meaning, and yet I was miserable, and I was very anxious, very depressed, and I was wondering, why am I like this? So then. Everything in our society told us, work hard, get those grades, get a good job, get a good income, and then you'll be happy. And I wasn't happy. So I started reading various self-help books and turning to various, aspects of personal growth to see if I could cope with my own depression and anxiety. And those kind of interests led me to start training as a therapist. Gradually, I started to cut down the amount of medical practice that I was doing and started to, as a sideline, do counseling and therapy. And gradually, over the space of a couple of years, the medical practice reduced and reduced and reduced, and the kind of therapy side of things took over. And eventually, I just said goodbye to practicing as a medical doctor and just became a full-time therapist and coach. And that was interesting because my income plummeted. You make a lot more money as a family doctor than you do as a coach or therapist. But while my income plummeted, my satisfaction in my work went up and up and up. And so at the same time as kind of doing this stuff with clients, I was also working on myself and trying numerous different approaches to see what was going to help me with my depression and my anxiety. And I found lots of bits and pieces from various models that were helpful for various things at various times, but I was still hadn't found a package that kind of pulled together all the stuff that I liked and left out all the bits that I found didn't work or weren't for me. So we condensed probably about 6 or 7 years together into that little spiel there. And really finding ACT was where it all came together. It enabled me to deal with my own anxiety much better, may enable me to kind of rapidly take the power and impact out of all my kind of self-critical, self-judgmental thoughts, and enable me to kind of massively enhance the kind of meaning of fulfillment in my life. So I fell in love with it, and the love affair continues almost 20 years later.
So what was like your go-to unhooking technique for acceptance, for handling all the difficult internal experiences?
Well, gosh, I mean, probably the simplest, easiest unhooking technique to teach people is just the non-judgmental noticing and naming of the thoughts and feelings that are hooking them. So, for example, the thought pops up in your head, I'm a loser. And a very simple noticing and naming technique is to go, I'm having the thought that I'm a loser, or there's my mind telling me I'm a loser, or there's the loser story showing up. And this kind of simple practice of noticing and naming your thoughts, it's quite powerful. For a lot of people, it instantly kind of takes the impact out of them. Like, I'm a loser. I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. You can go a step further. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. And if you practice this a bit, then it becomes very quick. You realize that story is showing up in your head, and you just kind of acknowledge it's there, a bit like you might nod at someone you recognize walking down the street. And, there it is again. There's the not good enough story. Another kind of popular method for unhooking from thoughts is thanking your mind. So whatever your mind says, no matter how mean or nasty or hurtful or judgmental it is, just with a sense of humor. And it's got to be done with a sense of humor, a sense of playfulness. You thank your mind for that. Thanks, mind. Thanks for sharing, and it's okay. If your mind replies, well, you can use that unhooking technique, but you're still a loser, you're still an idiot. Thanks, mind. Thanks for sharing. You don't buy into it. So you're not agreeing with it. You're not saying, yes, you're right, I'm a loser, but you're not fighting with it. You're not arguing with it. You're just going, okay, that's what my mind is giving me right now. A bit like you might handle a provocative teenager who's saying things deliberately try to get a reaction from, thanks for sharing. And, I always kind of get a little bit concerned talking about these things on podcasts because, I'm just describing methods, and people actually need to try them and practice them to really understand and experience what it's like. But what I can say is that these, simple methods often give people profound relief from their thoughts without actually getting rid of the thoughts or making them go away. It's like the thought's still there, but I start to see that this thought is a construction of words in my head. And in this model, we don't really ever get concerned about whether thoughts are true or false. What we're interested in is, are they helpful? So if I let these thoughts guide what I do, if I let them guide my actions, if I listen into them, are they giving me something useful and helpful that's going to help me make my life better, improve my life? So there's no time spent in kind of debating whether they're true or false. It's just a very practical approach. Is it helpful? Is it useful? And one of the key insights in ACT is we can't stop these thoughts showing up. There's no delete button in the brain. You can't magically transform your brain into a kind of positive thinking cheerleader that only says, helpful stuff all the time. Negative, unhelpful thoughts are inevitable and will keep showing up. But we can learn to take the bite, the sting out of them. And we can learn to sort of let your mind play on a bit like a radio playing in the background. So I often use the analogy, you know what I'm talking about. You've had a radio playing in the background and you hardly knew it was there. And then maybe one of your favorite songs came on the radio and suddenly, you're singing along with it. And then the song changed and the radio faded into the background again. Well, we can learn to do the same with our own thought stream. When our mind's broadcasting something useful and helpful and life-enhancing, we kind of make use of that. But when it's broadcasting all the doom and gloom and negative stuff that minds always do, we just let it play on in the background. And this is very different to trying to ignore a radio, because if you've ever tried to ignore a radio or a loud voice in a restaurant or a lawnmower going off or a car alarm, you know that trying to ignore that stuff actually just makes it bother you more. So it's not about ignoring it. It's about just kind of letting it be there and taking what's useful from that never-ending stream of thoughts that our mind generates.
Yeah. So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that we have in general about how our minds and our psychology work? Because on the one hand, I grew up not knowing any of this and thinking I didn't know I had control. I didn't know there was a rudder. On the other hand, I got into sort of the self-help movement that was very much about control your thoughts, change your state, be the master. And neither of those was very helpful to me. In fact, they were both oppressive. And then discovering ACT. What do you think? What are the misconceptions that when people understand and let go of, that regardless of the technique you're sharing, can help people find sort of peace and committed action?
So, what are the misunderstandings or the misconceptions? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why my self-help book is called The Happiness Trap, because popular ideas about happiness are often misleading and inaccurate and will actually make you miserable if you base your life on them. One of these ideas is that happiness means feeling good. If you ask most people what is happiness, they'll describe it as feeling good or a good feeling. And in most dictionaries, there's a number of definitions of happiness, but the number one is usually something like a state of pleasure or contentment. So if that's your view of happiness, then there's no such thing as lasting happiness. How long can a good feeling last? Think of the happiest day of your life. How long were you feeling happy for before there was some frustration, disappointment, anxiety, irritation? And so, if we live a full human life, we're going to feel the full range of human emotions, not just the ones that feel pleasant. We're also going to feel, we will feel some pleasant ones like love and joy and so forth, but we're also going to feel sadness and anger and loneliness and anxiety and guilt. We're going to feel all the human emotions. So, there's this idea out there that if you're happy or if you're living a good life, you're only going to kind of feel positive, pleasant feelings all the time. And that sets people up to struggle with all the difficult but inevitable emotions that are normal and natural and part of being human. That then building on that is the idea that the best way for me to be happy and to have a good life is to avoid or get rid of all of those difficult thoughts and feelings, all the unpleasant, painful ones. And so what happens is that pulls people into a self-defeating struggle with their own thoughts and feelings, trying harder and harder to control the way they feel, to hold on to the good, pleasant feelings and eliminate, avoid, escape, get away from all the negative, unpleasant feelings. And the technical psychobabble name for this battle with your unwanted thoughts and feelings is called experiential avoidance. The ongoing attempt to avoid or get rid of unwanted, difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, and so on. And what the research shows crystal clear is the greater your level of experiential avoidance, the more effort you're putting into trying to control your emotions, to get rid of these unwanted, painful inner experiences, actually the higher your risk of depression, the higher your risk of almost any kind of mental health disorder, the higher your risk of addiction, the worse your performance, the more likely you are to suffer long-term disability from any type of illness or injury, and the list goes on and on. So high levels of experiential avoidance are really, really bad for your physical and mental health and well-being. But of course, so many popular approaches, it's all about feeling good and get rid of those painful feelings and get rid of those painful thoughts. And there's other research that actually shows that, it's kind of emotion suppression, kind of trying to suppress or push away or get away from painful emotions actually has a rebound effect. They come back with greater and greater frequency and intensity. Same thing occurs with thought blocking. Some popular ideas, if a negative thought pops into your head, you snap an elastic band, or you visualize a stop sign, or you say, go away thought. And again, the research is clear that actually works in the short term to give you a little bit of relief. But again, there's this rebound effect. The thoughts start coming back with greater and greater frequency and intensity. So, I guess there's just so many of these kind of ideas out there that are misleading and will ultimately make your life worse. But by far the biggest one of them is, the best way to have a good life is to control your emotions, kind of get rid of the unpleasant ones and cling to the pleasant ones. And I think it's much better to rather than talking about positive and negative emotions, probably better to talk about emotions that feel good and emotions that feel painful, because sadness and anger and anxiety and guilt, these are really useful emotions. We need them to live our life, and so calling them negative is a bit unfair. Let's acknowledge they're painful, but boy, are they useful.
So you have the various diffusion techniques, some of which you mentioned around, I'm having the thought, there's my mind telling me. There's also that raises the question, just ontologically, like who's the I and who's the mind? So then we have this other aspect of it's like acceptance, or I guess, what is it like where I identify with something other than my mind. And so what am I identifying with if I'm not my mind? Like where do I stand?
Well, that's a deep philosophical question. And how many hours do we have? But look, basically, each one of us is one whole human being. And we can talk about self in many, many different ways. But in everyday language, we tend to talk about self in just two ways most of the time. We talk about the physical self, people call that the body, and we talk about the thinking self, people call that the mind. But there's this third aspect of self that rarely gets a mention, this part of a human being that can notice your thoughts, notice your feelings, notice your body, notice the world changing around you, notice whatever you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. Notice how the reflection in the mirror changes from year to year. There's this kind of noticing self or observing self, or some people call it the silent self because it doesn't think. It just notices thoughts. Some people call this the silent witness. There's lots of different names for it. None of the names really kind of give it justice, but do justice to it. But it's an aspect of us that is always potentially available, but easily forgotten about. A lot of the time I just call it the noticing part, the part of you that just does all of the noticing. People say I think therefore I am, but who notices the thoughts? Who notices the body that's hosting the brain that's generating those thoughts? There's this kind of noticing self part that's in there, and it can be, some of the exercises in ACT are around learning how to access that noticing self and bring it into everyday life, because again, these thoughts are showing up. I'm useless, I'm hopeless, I can't do this, I'm not enough of that. And we can use this noticing self part to kind of step back and say, okay, well, those are thoughts, those are words and pictures that are coming through my head. And if you can see that your thoughts, if you can see the true nature of your thoughts, that they're basically words and pictures, then you can have a choice about what you do with them. You don't have to take them as true. You don't have to. If I can introduce another jargon term, the term is cognitive fusion. So cognitive fusion basically means our thoughts are dominating us. They're dominating our awareness. They're dominating our behavior. And when we fuse with our thoughts, they seem like commands that we have to obey. They seem like very important things that we have to give all our attention. They seem like really wise advice that we have to follow, or they seem like the absolute truth. And so when we fuse with unhelpful thoughts, then that has a very negative impact over our behavior and over what we do. But if we can defuse from our thoughts, or, to use my earlier terminology, unhook from them, step back, see that they are words and pictures in our head, nothing more and nothing less than that, then we can say, well, actually, I don't have to obey these thoughts. I actually don't have to give them all my attention. I actually don't have to follow the advice that they're giving me. They may or may not be true. It's up to me what I do with these thoughts. If there's something useful in them, if they're pointing me to something meaningful and life-enhancing, then sure, use them. But if not, let them come and go in their own good time. And, so some of the techniques in ACT kind of work on diffusing skills, learning to actually see thoughts for what they are, but others use this noticing self part to kind of step back and watch your thoughts and let them flow through without getting swept away by them. So coming full circle back to your question, who am I? Well, you're one whole human being. There's a physical part, a body, and there's a thinking part, a mind, and there's a noticing part that kind of notices the body and the mind. And while your mind is changing from moment to moment, your thoughts, feelings continually changing, your body continually changing, this noticing self, noticing part is unchanging. It's always there, always noticing, even when we forget it's there.
Right. And then, in a lot of Eastern traditions, that's considered like the real us, right? The pure awareness, and everything else is either illusion or temporary. And one of the things I love about ACT and about your writing about it is, I can't remember the exact phrase, but you're like, we're not mindfulness fascists, right? Like when I was trying to study meditation, like I went around thinking I needed to be mindful all the time. And so I would be sitting down with someone and I'm like, well, I'm going to have a mindful meal. And I turned into this weird creature. It was like, oh, I have to pay attention to every bite, or, feel the shirt on my skin. And you're like, okay, like, do it if it's useful, but we don't have to, like, that's not an imperative, right?
That's so true. That's so true. It's easy to get a bit rigid and obsessive about this stuff. And of course, you've mentioned the M word there, mindfulness. It's a word that actually in the happiness trap, I don't mention that word until halfway through the book. I get people learning mindfulness skills before I tell them it's mindfulness. And the reason for that is because there's so many common misunderstandings about the term mindfulness. Many people think it means Buddhism. Many people think it means meditation. Many people think it's a way to still and clear your mind and eliminate all thoughts. Many people think it's a way to relax and feel good and control your emotions. And so that's why I prefer to use terms like unhooking skills or focusing your attention or engaging in what you're doing or opening up and making room for your feelings and letting them flow through you. These are all aspects of mindfulness, but I just as the concept gets more and more popular of mindfulness, the misconceptions when are getting more and more prevalent. So I tend to use this other language instead. But, when I talked about at the start about those 3 streams of skills that we teach in ACT, 2 of those streams, the ones that are about unhooking from difficult thoughts and feelings and the ones that are about focusing your intention and engaging, those are all mindfulness skills.
Gotcha. So one of the things you mentioned right at the beginning when I asked you like what ACT is you say it's skills-based. And that's one of my favorite things about it because I've had a fair amount of therapeutic interventions in my life, some of which have been very helpful, others which not so much, but they were all sort of insight-based. Like I had an aha, and now I was different. And for a week or 2 weeks or a month, I was different, and then I could just feel whatever mess was inside me reasserting itself, the pattern reassembling like a horror movie. And as a coach and just as a human being, the idea that it's really not about necessarily understanding or knowledge or wisdom or insight, but it's really about just practicing stuff over and over again. That sort of, if being an effective human being is like playing the piano, you don't just expect to be able to sit down and do it. You've got to pay your dues.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Absolutely. I mean, that really extends to any skill, doesn't it? Whether it's riding a bicycle or, cooking a great meal, you've got to kind of put the practice in and learn how to do those routines. And it's the same when it comes to psychological skills. So many people think, oh, well, if I just have a chat about it with a therapist, then it'll all be resolved. And so, if you go and see an ACT coach or an ACT therapist, at the end of every session, they will give you some skills to take away and practice, and then when you come back next week, they'll say, did you practice them? What happened? What did you find? So it's not an approach for everyone. Some people are not looking for that. Some people like to have a chat. And I would kind of say that ACT does give you insights, often some very profound insights, but that's just one piece of the whole approach.
Right. Yeah. For me, the insights are then open doors to new actions, right, and new practices. It's the taking action that kind of reifies it and makes it anti-fragile. Whereas I felt like a lot of my old therapy was pretty fragile in terms of what happens when it hit the world. Yes.
Yes. Well, this also links back. You were asking about, practices that maybe don't work so well for a lot of people. One of these is kind of being logical and rational. Many approaches out there think, if you can just think logically and rationally enough, then that's going to, get rid of all your painful emotions or stop those negative, unhelpful thoughts showing up. And of course, it's not the case, and I've often, kind of said to clients, look, logically and rationally, that these thoughts aren't true, but that's not going to stop them from coming back. They will come back again and again and again. Your mind's been telling you this not good enough story since you were, 5 years old, you're 45 years old now, your mind's not just going to magically stop telling you that you're not good enough just because you've had an insight into the fact that that story started when your parents were neglecting you as a child. It will keep telling you that. The question is, what do you do when I'm not good enough shows up? So it's I guess one of the insights that people get from ACT is into the nature of human existence, that pain is inevitable. Your mind is I often describe the mind as it's like an overly helpful friend. It's like, have you ever had one of those friends that was just trying so hard to help they became a nuisance?
I think I've been that friend.
So have I. I'm parent as well.
Yeah.
And so, but we've all had someone in our life that was trying so hard to help they became a nuisance. And most of us have been that person at times too. And a lot of the time, this is what your mind's doing. For example, a mind that's continually beating you up and telling you, I'm not good enough, and, criticizing and judging you. What's it trying to do there? It's basically trying to help you change your behavior. It's saying, shape up, stop doing that, do something differently, otherwise something bad's going to happen. You need to do things differently. But the problem is it's using those kind of really old-fashioned methods of, Victorian teachers that would kind of whack you with a ruler or call you stupid, thinking that was a good way to change behavior. So self-judgment, self-criticism is not really very effective at behavior change. I say to clients all the time, if beating yourself up was a good way to change your behavior, wouldn't you be perfect by now? Everything that we consider that a mind does that we consider it to be problematic or unhelpful or difficult, if you actually look at the purpose underlying it, there's an intention there. Your mind is in some way trying to help you, trying to either help you avoid something that you don't want or get something that you do want. But unfortunately, lots of the strategies it's using are just ineffective in helping to motivate us in a way that enables us to build a rich and meaningful life.
Mm. So one of the things that has changed most about my coaching since I've embraced ACT is I've really let go of a focus on goals and pivoted to a focus on values. Mm-hmm. Right. So what I thought was, well, goals are less powerful because they're in the future. Mm-hmm. Right. And values are powerful because you can enact them in the moment. And I think that's a part of it. But I think there's other things about values that are just closer to people. So, we always start with goals, like what do you want to get? What do you want to achieve? What is it going to look like? And once we have that, it's almost all the conversations, except for recalibrating towards that, like a GPS, it's almost always around values. Can you talk a little bit about values in ACT?
Yeah, I mean, values form the foundation of the ACT approach. So values are basically your heart's deepest desires for how you want to behave as a human being, how you want to treat yourself, how you want to treat others, how you want to treat the world around you, the qualities you want to bring to your actions on an ongoing basis. Whereas goals are things that you're trying to achieve or get in the future. So, if your goal is to get married, that's in the future. But if your value is being loving, you can live the value of being loving right now. Whoops.
I thought I had turned that off.
Is that your phone? You're going to edit that bit out.
I think I will leave it in as a testament to my own imperfection and humanity.
Aren't we lucky? This is all about acceptance, this podcast. If my value is being loving, I can live that in 1,000 different ways today. I can be loving towards myself, my friends, my family, my next door neighbor, the plants that I'm growing in my garden, my dog, my cat. There's so many ways I can live the value of being loving, even if I never achieve the goal of marriage, even if I never achieve the goal of finding a partner. And so values, as you said, I can live them in this moment right now, whereas goals are always in the future. So what we're kind of wanting to do is use values as our motivator. I can live my values every step of the way towards achieving a given goal. I can live my values even if I don't achieve the goal. And if, it's a given that there's going to be lots of goals in life that we don't achieve. We set out for, and either we get sidetracked or we try and fail. But the beautiful thing is, even if I don't achieve a particular goal, if I get sidetracked, I can still live those values. And so that's very kind of liberating. I don't know if, the analogy that I often give is two kids in the back of a car. Mum's driving them to Disneyland, and it's a 3-hour car journey. One kid is just totally goal focused. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? So for that kid, it's just a journey of chronic frustration, and he's irritating everyone else in the car. The second kid's got the same goal. He also wants to get to Disneyland, but he's in touch with his values around being playful and having fun and being curious. So he's looking out of the window and playing I Spy with My Little Eye and noticing the cows in the fields and noticing interesting cars and trucks on the freeway and, playing games and stuff. So he's actually appreciating the journey. He's living his values every step of the journey, and it's kind of fulfilling. They both reach Disneyland at the same time, and they both have, achieved their goal, and they both have a wonderful time at Disneyland. But the first kid had a frustrating journey. The second kid had a fulfilling journey. Now, if the car breaks down halfway to Disneyland, well, both kids are going to be disappointed because neither of them got to achieve their goal. But at least the second kid had a fulfilling journey up to that point. And when the pickup truck is towing them home and, they're sitting up in the front of the pickup truck with the driver, the first kid is, it's not fair. I want to go to Disneyland. When's my car going to be fixed? When are we going to go to Disneyland? Whereas the second kid's like, okay, well, it's kind of cool being up here in the front of a pickup truck. Yeah, I missed out on Disneyland, but wow, this is kind of a different view. It was so much higher than the rest of the traffic. And again, kind of noticing what he can see and being playful and being curious and, living his values. So the values-focused life is much more fulfilling and much more rewarding because we get to live our values every step of the way towards achieving our goals. If we don't achieve our goals, we still get to live our values. And our values can actually motivate us to do the hard work that's necessary for those more difficult, challenging goals.
So I want to take that sort of the Disney story and kind of segue the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is your recent work on ACT and trauma, right? Which, so the other thing that has impacted my coaching more than anything else is polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges, and I know that you bring in some of that. So I'm thinking about the two kids. One of them, I'm telling myself, is their values are both sort of playful, new experience, novelty, fun, curiosity, and that's why they're going to Disney. Like if they weren't into that, neither one would want to go to the theme park. The one who is in sort of social engagement, who's like neurologically, sort of feels safe in their body, in the situation, and in the world in general, is able to see opportunities for playfulness, curiosity, novelty seeking, whereas the one who's in, let's say, fight or flight, attack or avoid, simply can't. And the two kids might swap, from one week, it could be a state, or it could just be like one of them is in that because of something that happened, their dad yelled at them in the morning, or they got a bad grade, or something. How do you see ACT informing and being informed by, whether it's about polyvagal theory in specific or just like the nervous system that's below sort of conscious cognitive thought? How do they play together?
Yeah, well, so I think I like to talk about a window of flexibility. So when we're in fight or flight mode, that typically gives rise to emotions, the fight emotions, anger, frustration, irritability, or the flight emotions, kind of fear, anxiety. And if we can't respond flexibly to that stuff, then we tend to fall into very narrow, rigid, inflexible patterns of behavior. We tend to start fighting conflict or running away, avoiding. Our behavior becomes quite limiting, self-limiting. And what ACT does is it widens our window of flexibility. We learn much more flexible ways of responding to fight or flight mode. So I've got all of those fight or flight emotions showing up, kind of fear, anger, anxiety, frustration. And again, I don't need to control them. I don't need to get rid of them. I don't need to make those go away and feel calm and relaxed. What I can do is respond flexibly. I can unhook from the anger and the fear and the anxiety. I can acknowledge there's a fight or flight reaction, and I can regain control over my physical actions. There's a huge amount of emphasis in ACT on relinquishing control over what you don't have control over, which is into a lot of your thoughts and feelings, but also taking control over what you do have a lot of control over, which is your physical actions. And I can't really do this without good unhooking skills. But if I've got good unhooking skills, then I can respond flexibly to that fight or flight response. I can unhook from those difficult emotions. I can take control of my actions, and I can start doing what's important. And once I've done that, then I can bring my attention to focus and engage in what I'm doing. And as I do that, what happens is, we say a lot in ACT, emotions are like the weather. It continually changes. So if I am in a really kind of stressful environment, that fight or flight response will continue. And I can still keep living my values and taking action and engaging in what I'm doing, even as it continues. But if the environment changes and I'm no longer under pressure and that stress is no longer there, then of course we expect the fight and flight response will settle down and there'll be other emotions that come in place. So, I guess this is one of the big paradigm shifts in ACT. We don't try to control the emotions, we control our actions and our attention, and then the emotions follow later. It's the same with, so polyvagal theory talks about the freeze response. If we can't fight off a threat and we can't run away from a threat and the threat is severe, then we basically freeze up and shut down. Again, we can bring these ACT processes to bear if we're kind of going into this kind of freeze shutdown mode, which often gives rise to feelings of apathy, lethargy, hopelessness, or just the kind of urge to quit or lie down and give up. If our window of flexibility is narrow, then we will be dominated by those urges and thoughts and feelings that show up in shutdown mode, and we will give up and lie down and freeze up. But if we can bring these kind of ACT processes to bear and respond flexibly, we start to notice and name our inner experience. We acknowledge his freeze mode coming in, his shutdown mode. We unhook from the kind of the feelings and urges. We again take control of our actions and start kind of moving our physical body and engaging in the world. Then what we find is that we're no longer controlled by that freeze or shutdown response. We can actually engage in life and do what's important. And of course, as we start acting on our values and engaging in life, then the feelings and thoughts change as a result of that. So it's a pretty big paradigm shift from many models of trauma therapy. We're talking about trauma-focused ACT here. It's, I wrote the textbook Trauma-Focused ACT came out last year. What inspired me to write it was actually a protocol that I wrote for the World Health Organization back in 2015. They wanted an ACT protocol for use in refugee camps. And when they asked me for this, I was like, what, that's ridiculous. How, I mean, in these refugee camps, like the first camp they tested this in was in Uganda, and like 250,000 refugees living in this camp. Most of them have had multiple traumas. They've witnessed murder or horrific violence. They've experienced violence. They've had to leave their country. Now they're living in tents or huts with minimal resources. And the World Health Organization is saying, well, we'll give them a 10-hour ACT protocol and see if that helps them. And I was like, what? And then they said, yeah, how are we going to deliver this? Well, via audio recordings. What? So basically, they get a group of about 20 refugees together. The whole app program is on audio recordings. They sit and listen to this 2 hours at a time over 5 weeks, so 10 hours in total. There's a facilitator that runs the groups. The facilitator is not a health professional. It's someone who's just had 5 days of training in running the ACT group. Basically they teach them how to unhook from all those difficult thoughts and feelings. If they're having these kind of fight, flight, freeze responses, how to respond flexibly to them, how to live their values in the refugee camp. There's all sorts of things that you don't have in a refugee camp. So all sorts of goals that are absolutely impossible to achieve in a refugee camp, but you can live your values every day in that refugee camp. So it's about living your values, engaging in your life, unhooking from thoughts and feelings, taking control of your actions. And I was really scared. I mean, because I didn't think it would work. I went along with it, hoping it would work. But, there was that voice in my head saying this, it's just impossible. How are you going to help these folks? So the results were amazing, though. The World Health Organization has done 3 published studies on this. The first one was a massive study that they did with Ugandan, South Sudanese women that were in a Ugandan refugee camp, and they found that just from 10 hours of ACT, these women who almost all had experienced repeated gender-based violence, significant reductions in depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. So that was published in the top medical journal in the world, The Lancet, a couple of years back. So it shows that, we can help people with severe trauma and in a very rapid space of time, I don't know if I answered your question or if I just went on a ramble. I think polyvagal theory. I think what polyvagal theory adds to ACT is that it helps you understand those responses. It helps you understand what's going on when you start freezing and shutting down. I think, again, that's a useful insight to know why is this going on in your body and why does trauma make your body do this stuff?
Yeah, now I know we're at the top of the hour. I just want to kind of reflect, like from my experience, when I studied stress management in the 90s, got a doctorate in it, and learned basically, okay, when you're stressed out, tell yourself X or Y, like, is this in my control, or I don't need my body to get involved, or count to 10. And I found that 100% of the time when I was stressed out, I didn't have access to the part of my brain that knew how to do that. So one of the things I think ACT has helped me with is practicing so that it becomes neurological as opposed to cognitive choice. And the other, I think, is that with the way you're describing diffusion and unhooking from thoughts, it's like my own internal experience isn't as much of an unsafe neighborhood. Like I have felt like I can create fight or flight in myself by my thoughts that just turn into this vicious loop.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
So, yeah, I mean, there's, as you said, how many days do we have to continue this conversation? But we're at the top of the hour. I'm gonna keep my word. Where can people find you? One of my New Year's resolutions for 2023 is to start taking your courses. Your books are so good that I fool myself into thinking that I know how to do this stuff. But you have a wonderful online presence. You're a fantastic teacher. How can people find you, find your work, and if they want to study with you, continue that way?
Well, so with professionals, coaches and therapists and so forth, the best place to look is psychwire.com. But if it's the general public looking for kind of self-development, personal growth, then thehappinesstrap.com.
Okay, great. And you're still keeping an active... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and on social media, it would be the Act Made Simple Facebook group for professionals and the Happiness Trap Facebook group for the general public.
Gotcha. I'm a member of the Act Made Simple, and it's like I feel like I'm living in a candy store that's just giving out. Like, oh, look, here's another 3-page Word document that I will totally change how I work. So it's a wonderful community. And people, I don't know how you manage to get a friendly community on Facebook that isn't trying to kill each other.
Yeah.
But it's a really nurturing, wonderful place. It's like this weird corner of Facebook where people are nice to each other.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for inviting me to the podcast. It was worth waiting 4 years for.
Absolutely. Hopefully we don't have to wait 4 years for the next one, but you'll see me in one of your courses. And Thank you so much. Your work is just making the world a better place in so many ways. Russ Harris, thanks for all you do and for taking the time today.
Thanks, Howie. Cheers.
Take care.
And that is a wrap with Russ Harris. You can find the show notes at plantyourself.com/547. Be sure to check out the Happiness Trap if you'd like to apply these principles to your own life, and Act Made Simple, or if you go to Russ Harris's website, you can take any of his trainings for healthcare professionals or therapists, coaches, things like that. And if you want to be coached on ACT, you could reach out to me, hj@plantyourself.com. Let me try that one again, hj@plantyourself.com. And we can talk about whether my coaching modality that involves using ACT, that is framed on the 4 steps that are the basis of the book You Can Change Other People that Peter Bregman and I wrote, and as well as polyvagal theory, sort of the 3 pillars of how I coach. You can check that all out, and we can talk about whether that would be right for you. All right, so movement news. Just got back from a fantastic weekend at Kripalu, where I learned advanced Qigong, or beginner Qigong, but advanced for me, from Robert Peng, whom I've been studying with online. It was great to kind of get energetic transmissions in person. I feel like it really deepened my practice, and I just love doing it. Haven't done a ton of other exercise, but this feels like it's filling a gap for now. And as the weather warms and we get closer to, I just signed up for the Fire on the Bayou Ultimate Tournament in April, so that gives me a deadline for kind of getting back into running shape. Garden news, not much. It's January, so basically we look at seed catalogs and ignore the garden itself.
All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filkinovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Bennett, Gila Sert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Charlie, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Koppel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayad, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Marani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazleton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Laurie Fenny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Tricia Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.